Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Yema Navygraf FSM. FSM stands for Force Sous-Marine. This watch is available from yema.com for €849. So firstly, let's look at the travel case that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the other items one gets with the piece. So the watch comes in this Marine Nationale Yema branded hardshell travel case. As you can see, we have the coloured Marine Nationale navy stripes. I'll show you the interior. The interior is finished to a good standard with the fabric, and as you can see we have two lycra straps in the Marine Nationale navy stripes, and in the base we have two coloured lycra straps in blue and red which represent the French tricolour. So Yema was founded in 1948 in France, and presently they make their watches and their in-house calibers in Morteau in France. So with regards to the other items, this is the owner's instruction manual, clear concise diagrams, high definition pictures. The instructions are in English and they detail the operation of the movement used, which is the caliber Yema 2000 automatic, which is made in-house in Morteau in France. And lastly, one also gets this leather guarantee card. It makes a refreshing change to use genuine leather for the guarantee card rather than using the default option of plastic or cardboard. It's also finished to a high standard in gilt, and the stitching is done to a good standard around the perimeter. Now, as this is a press release sample, it's not stamped by Yema and it's not filled in with the model number or the date of purchase, but if you purchase the watch from yema.com, they will stamp it and fill it in to activate the 2-year international warranty. Usually at this price point one would expect a 12-month international guarantee, so to get 2 years of warranty is very reassuring. So with regards to the specifications of the piece, this is the Yema Navygraf FSM, and as I've detailed, FSM stands for Force Sous-Marine. So I'll give you the background to the piece. The Navygraf was originally made by Yema in the 1970s, so this is a modern day heritage reissue of the 1970s Navygraf. Yema have worked in collaboration with Marine Nationale, the French Navy, to design this piece to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Strategic Oceanic Force. So the Strategic Oceanic Force is known as the FOST, and a branch of the FOST is the Force Sous-Marine, or the FSM. So this was designed specifically for their sailors working on their fleet of nuclear submarines in the Marine Nationale Navy, and several of the aspects of this piece are made specifically for working on nuclear submarines, such as the contrasting red second hand, because their nuclear submarine sailors work under red lights, and the red second hand contrasts very well with the black dial under red light. So with regards to dimensions, we have a 39mm case diameter, we have a 47.1mm lug-to-lug measurement, we have a thickness of 12.3mm and a lug width of 19mm. The H-link bracelet tapers from 19mm at the lugs down to 15.8mm at the flip-lock clasp, and as you can see, the flip-lock clasp is signed to high standard with the Yema emblem engraved. Usually I'm critical of brands only having 3 micro adjustment holes. Yema deserve credit for making the correct decision, because this clasp has 4 micro adjustment holes, which allows for fine-tuning the length of the bracelet to get the perfect fit. Beautiful brushed satin finish to the top side, underside and flanks to the clasp. Beautiful lustre to the 316L grade stainless steel, finished to a very high standard. No sharp edges, no burrs and no sharp points to the corners. So I'll show you the interior of the clasp. Solid milled 316L grade stainless steel, also engraved with Yema. No sharp edges, no burrs. Beautiful lustre to the finishing. Now, being critical, I would like to see a heavier gauge of 316L grade stainless steel used for the body of the clasp, but on a positive note, we do have a very well executed solid milled diver's extension link, as you can see, and it deploys with a nice positive click and also presses back in with a nice positive click, so it's actually a very well engineered solid milled extension clasp, and I like that they've used this, because sometimes one doesn't see solid milled clasps at this price point, solid milled extension links at this price point, sometimes they're pressed. So it's good, but I would just like to see a heavier gauge. Nice to see a cutout scallop underneath the flip lock, which means one can get one's index fingernail underneath it, and that makes it easier to open up the clasp. So as you can see, there's a nice scoop, there's a nice scallop to it, and that works very well. With regards to the rest of the specification, we have a flat sapphire crystal with clear AR coating on the underside. The clear anti-reflective coating does an outstanding job of reducing the glare and the highly reflective nature of the underside to the flat sapphire crystal. Now, the original 1970s Navygraf used a Bakelite bezel insert, which was like acrylic, and the negative of Bakelite bezel inserts is they were very soft and therefore prone to being scuffed and scratched. So Yema have made the correct decision because this sapphire crystal bezel insert retains the aesthetic. It looks like the 1970s Bakelite bezel insert used on the original Navygraf, but of course sapphire is more hard and scratch resistant, so it looks like Bakelite, but it's as hard and scratch resistant as ceramic. And I think they've made the correct decision because had they upgraded to using ceramic, it would have spoiled the look of it. It wouldn't look like the original 1970s Navygraf. Using clear sapphire means that it does look like Bakelite, but it does perform like ceramic. So sapphire is the correct choice. It's also fully lumed with C1 Superluminova, which is very strong specification. So the sapphire bezel insert works very well with the flat sapphire crystal. Usually the Navygraf has exclamation mark printed indices on the dial. I've previously reviewed the standard version of the Navygraf and also the Marine Nationale version of the Navygraf, which both had the exclamation mark printed indices, but this one being the FSM version, the 4th Sous-Marine version, it has the exclamation mark indices enlarged at the 12, 9, 6 and 3, and as you can see they are clearly legible. They've also split the 12 o'clock printed index on the dial, and that gives good orientation because in the dark one can clearly orientate which is the 12 o'clock index and which is the 9, 6 and 3 exclamation mark printed indices. Now, as I've detailed, the Marine Nationale sailors working on the nuclear submarine fleet, they work under a red light, and Marine Nationale worked in collaboration with Yema to design this piece specifically for the sailors working on their nuclear submarines. So they made the red second-hand contrast with the matte black dial so that when it's under red light on a nuclear submarine, the sailors can see it clearly, and also the hands are also pure white and they're fully lumed with C1 Superluminova, and that also adds to the legibility and the contrast with the matte black dial. Now, they've also darkened the text. If you look at the Yema brand emblem in Yema Navygraf text and the rest of the text on the dial, you can see it's not in white as per the standard Navygraf and also the Navygraf Marine Nationale edition, which I reviewed. They've made it in a dark grey, and they've called this the phantom dial. They wanted to dull down the text on the dial because that enhances the legibility of the rest of the dial. It makes the indices stand out more and also the white minute ticks stand out more. And bear in mind, the nuclear submarine sailors are working under red lights, they're not working under white lights, and therefore making the indices stand out more and also the chaptering stand out more by dulling down the text on the dial works very well. So legibility is outstanding, the functionality is outstanding, and the lack of a date complication means perfect symmetry. The 9, 6 and 3 applied printed indices are clearly legible. I like the fact they've enlarged the characteristic exclamation mark 9, 6 and 3 printed indices. They do enhance the legibility. So with regards to the crown, it's solid 316L grade stainless steel, coin edge finished, mirror polished domed cap and embossed with the Marine Nationale anchor emblem to a good standard. Very nicely finished and nice to see the Marine Nationale anchor. So let's test the screw down crown execution. The screw down crown provides an effective hermetic seal to 300 meters, which is very strong specification. Absolutely silky smooth. This is 10 out of 10 screw down crown execution. Perfect interface between the internal thread of the stainless steel crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. So the caliber Yema 2000 doesn't have a date complication, so in the first position one can manually wind the caliber Yema 2000 to top it up to its maximum 42-hour power reserve. So the caliber Yema 2000 is made in-house in Morteau in France, as is the watch itself. Nice firm resistance. One can feel the tension in the mainspring gradually building up in the Yema Caliber 2000. I like the firm feeling of it. It feels firmer when manually winding than an SW200-1 or an ETA 2824-2. And I like the feeling of it. One can feel the tension building up to its maximum 42 hours. Putting it out to the first click position is the final click setting position because we don't have a date complication. And if you look at the contrasting red second hand, you can see I have now hacked the movement. It's possible to set the time precisely to the second. So we're now in the time setting position. Nice firm resistance to the gearing of the Caliber 2000. It does feel firmer than an SW200-1 or an ETA 2824-2. I like the friction in the gearing. Now it does feel very smooth, but I like that there's no backplay, clockwise and anti-clockwise. There's an immediate response. When one rotates the crown clockwise or anti-clockwise, the minute hand responds immediately without any backplay. So it's a good tight mechanism. I really like the feeling of the Caliber 2000. It's one of the best Yema in-house calibers. Pushing it back in, it's got a nice positive click, and that restarts the movement. The contrasting red second hand begins to sweep around the dial once again. So let's test screwing it back down. Immediate thread pickup. This is outstanding. Screw down crown execution. 10 out of 10. They really cannot improve upon this. The machining to the internal thread of the stainless steel crown perfectly interfaces with the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. When screwing it back down, one can feel the compression of the O-ring inside the stainless steel crown compressing against the end of the stainless steel crown tube, reinstating the 300 meters of hermetic seal. So silky smooth, nice firm resistance to it, and I like the compression of the O-ring. One can feel it compress and the hermetic seal coming back. So I'll show you the case back. Solid 316L grade stainless steel, concentric CNC lathe tool machining to the circumference. The milled slots are well executed, no sharp edges, no burrs. Centre section has a matte bead blasted effect to the background, and we have an embossed anchor. Now this isn't the Marine Nationale anchor. If you look at the top portion of the anchor, you can see it is a nuclear submarine, and the lower portion is the conventional anchor to represent it's part of the Marine Nationale, the French Navy fleet. So the embossing is done to a very high standard, and I like that it has the Force Sous-Marine nuclear submarine anchor emblem, the FSM emblem, and it's also embossed with a very high standard with the Marine Nationale as well. So very well executed. The engraving is done to a high standard, no sharp edges, no burrs, and it's very low profile, bearing in mind it's 300 meters. This is the kind of flat, low profile caseback one would expect with 200 meters of hermetic seal, but this is 300 meters of hermetic seal, so strong specification. But you can see that the Yema Caliber 2000 is clearly a low profile movement because they've been able to make the caseback very flat, and this is the kind of flatness one would expect with a manual wind or quartz powered piece, and it doesn't have a bubble back caseback as one would expect with 300 meters. So very low profile and flat, very comfortable against the wrist, and also very aesthetically pleasing. Right, so with regards to the bezel, solid 316L grade stainless steel, coin edge finished, and there's a large undercut which is tall, brush satin finish to the undercut, which is very aesthetically pleasing. Nice large teeth to the coin edge bezel, and the bezel is inlaid with sapphire crystal bezel insert, which is fully loomed with C1. Now let's test the bezel execution. 120 click unidirectional bezel, as one would expect. Nice firm resistance to it. I like the loud audible clicks. In terms of resistance, it feels very similar to a Steinhardt Ocean 139. It's firmer than a Seiko bezel action, and I actually like it. No lateral side-to-side play, no back play whatsoever. Good tight bezel action. It feels firmer than my Tudor Black Bay 58, and it feels firmer than a Seiko bezel action. So let's just check the alignments. The 120 clicks feel even all the way through the 360 degrees of rotation. Perfect. The loom pip and triangle perfectly aligned with the double printed index on the dial, and also the 60-minute tick. So perfect alignment, no lateral side-side play, and no back play. This is an example to other brands of how to get the bezel execution perfect. It doesn't feel too tight, it doesn't feel too loose. The resistance is medium, and I like that medium firm resistance to it. Right, so I'll give you a wrist shot, and you can see how it fits on my 8-inch wrist. Now it's slightly tight to get it across my gloved hand, so I'm going to deploy the diver's extension link. Nice positive click to the clasp, a nice positive second click to the flip lock. So as you can see on my 8-inch wrist, it's a nice snug fit. The Navygraf case is very comfortable to wear. Now the 39mm head of the piece does have some wrist presence for a 39mm. It wears more like a 40 because it does have a relatively tall bezel, but it may come as a surprise to you. Although it does have a tall bezel with an undercut, it's only 12.3mm. Now usually one would expect a 300-meter water-resistant piece to have a thickness of 13mm, but this is only 12.3. So it's a very low profile 300-meter water-resistant piece. It does look tall on wrist, but it is deceptive because it is actually only 12.3. 19mm lug width is rather odd. Now I think they should have made it 20, because 22 and 20 are the contemporary lug widths. The problem with the 19 lug width is it's odd by contemporary standards, and that does limit the strap options because 19 isn't a popular size. But however, I understand why Yema have decided to use 19 rather than 20, because the original 1970s Navygraf did use a 19mm lug width, and they obviously want to retain the vintage aesthetic of the original 1970s proportions. So 19 is odd, but it was the original size, and of course it will appeal to purist Navygraf collectors. The taper is good. 19 tapering down to 15.8 is a nice taper to the H-link bracelet, and the female pivoted end links do work very well, although they don't articulate as much as on a Tudor Black Bay 58, for example. So there is room for improvement. I think that they could improve the H-link bracelet to make the female pivoted end links articulate more, because we do still have a gap underneath the case, as you can see. If they made the female pivoted end links articulate down more, that would close up the gap between the end link in the bracelet, because as you can see there is a gap underneath the case, but that's a characteristic of the Navygraf case. The original 1970s version also had the same gap. Now of course purist Yema collectors that like the Navygraf will appreciate that. They like the original 19mm width and the original profile of the case, and they wouldn't like it being changed, but I think there is room for improvement on the articulation. The H-link bracelet is very aesthetically pleasing, and it makes a refreshing change from using the default option of an oyster style bracelet or a Jubilee style bracelet. I really like the H-link brushed satin finishing, and the flanks also brushed satin finish rather than being mirror polished. So very comfortable piece to wear for long periods of time, such as 8 to 12 hours per day. Very aesthetically pleasing, and the sapphire bezel insert works very well with the sapphire crystal, which is flat. There's a slight lip on the edge of the sapphire crystal which catches the light, so it's just proud rather than being flush, but it's almost flush with the the sapphire bezel insert. So it's just a gorgeous looking piece. The contrasting red second hand adds interest to the dial. Legibility is 10 out of 10, and the clarity is absolutely outstanding. The AR coating works very well, and I like the phantom dial with the darkened text on the dial in grey rather than the white as per the standard Navygraf. So feel good factor is excellent, comfort level is excellent, and it will fit up to an 8-inch wrist. Bearing in mind I'm wearing a glove and I've deployed the diver's extension, which is solid mil 316L grade stainless steel, finished to a good standard. It snaps in with a nice positive click and also deploys with a nice positive click. So they deserve credit for not using the cost-cutting measure of a pressed stainless steel extension link. I like to see a milled extension link, and it really does have a nice loud audible click. It feels very good to operate. The clasp, although it's not as heavy gauge as I would like, it does work very well. There's no play in it. It's a very well executed flip lock clasp. Right, so let's do a loom test and we'll see how the loom performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge it up to the absolute peak. Right, so that's now fully charged, and as you can see it has not disappointed. Now this does look like C3 Superluminova because it's green, but it's actually C1, and C1 is whiter than C3. C3 and BGW9 are my personal favourites, as you'll know from my previous reviews, but however I also like C3. With regards to performance, C3 is slightly brighter, so it does glow for a longer length of time than C3. It does have a whiter tone to it. This looks like a mix of C3 and C1. On the printed indices and also the pencil hands, the green tone matches correctly, and it also matches correctly with the fully loomed sapphire bezel insert. So I like that the hour ticks are fully loomed, and also the Arabic numerals, the 15, 30 and 45, and also the triangle. Legibility is excellent, and also it's glowing brightly and it will continue to glow for a good length of time. So on the printed indices and the pencil hands, it's clearly 5 to 6 layers, and they've also done a good job of fully looming the sapphire bezel insert. So this is an example to other brands of how to get it correct. This is 5 to 6 layers rather than using the cost-cutting measure of 2 to 3 layers. And I like the use of C1. Slightly lighter in tone than C3. And it does look very similar to the tritium loom which was used on the original 1970s Navygraf, and it retains the aesthetic of tritium, but of course superior performance. C1 Superluminova is brighter, and of course it's not radioactive. They couldn't use tritium loom now because on the nuclear submarines they're not allowed to use radioactive material such as tritium or radium loom. So they've now been discontinued, and of course superluminova performs better because it doesn't patina and it doesn't degrade in time as per tritium, which was used in the 1970s. So outstanding performance, and I really like the tone of it. It's lighter than C3, but it still looks like tritium. Right, so let's discuss the movement used, which is one of my favourite aspects of the piece. So as I've detailed, Yema make their watches in Morteau in France, and they also make their in-house calibers in Morteau in France. The parent company of Yema is Amber Group, and Amber invested heavily, spending millions of euro, developing in-house calibers such as the Yema Caliber 1000 and its successor, the Yema Caliber 2000, which is the no-date complication version of it. So this has the updated version of the Yema 2000 without the date complication. It has 29 joules. It runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 4 Hz. 42-hour power reserve, which is very good. The stated accuracy of the Caliber 2000 is plus or minus 10 seconds per day, so very good accuracy. Now I'm pleased to report that Yema are well regulating their Caliber 2000s. This one is running consistently at plus 2 seconds per day, which is actually within chronometer limits of minus 4 to plus 6. So plus 2 is excellent accuracy, 42-hour power reserve is very good. Now, if you look closely at the contrasting red second-hand, one of my favourite aspects of 4 Hz movements is they run at 28,800 vibrations per hour, rather than Seiko movements, for example, such as the NH35A, which runs at 3 Hz, which is 21,600 vibrations per hour. So the characteristic of 4 Hz movements is they have a nice smooth 4 Hz sweep. The red second-hand sweeps around the dial nice and smoothly. It doesn't judder or stutter around the dial as per a 3 Hz movement. Really, I regard 4 Hz and 28,800 vibrations per hour to be the perfect balance. It's the sweet spot. It's the perfect compromise between power reserve and accuracy. If one increases the beat rate and the frequency, of course, one gains more accuracy, but then one sacrifices power reserve. So if one increases the beat rate past 28,800, the movement becomes more accurate, but of course, one loses power reserve. But 4 Hz is a good compromise because one gets 42 hours of power reserve, but one also gets good accuracy. This is within plus or minus 10, and this one is actually running at plus 2. So I think they've made the correct choice by using a 4 Hz frequency for the Caliber 2000. It's a reliable, well-proven workhorse caliber. It's the successor to the 1000. Now, early versions of the Caliber 1000 did have some reliability issues, but however, Yema resolved that, and when they produced the Caliber 2000, they made the movement more accurate and they also made it more reliable. The build's quality, quality control, accuracy and materials have all been upgraded. So in terms of quality, I regard the Caliber 2000 in-house movement to be equal to an SW200-1 or an ETA 2824-2 Labor grade movement. And I think that this is excellent. It's regulated in 5 positions and to better accuracy than plus or minus 10, plus 2 is chronometer grade. No negatives to it whatsoever. It's very smooth to manually wind. It feels very solid. One can feel the tension in the mainspring gradually building up. So I would say it's a good alternative to using the SW200-1, and really it's unusual to get an in-house caliber made in France at this price point. It's €849, so Yema deserve full credit for using the Caliber 2000. The watch is made in France and also the movement is made in France. Right, so lastly I'll summarise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch should meet 2 criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price point. So the price point of this watch is €849. Yes, I consider it to be excellent quality, and yes, I consider it to be excellent value at €849. When it's getting a watch made in France and also an in-house caliber Yema 2000 movement, which is outstanding, plus 2 seconds per day and 42-hour power reserve, no negatives to it whatsoever. Yema have got the balance right because they had to retain the vintage aesthetic of the original 1970s Navygraf, but they've upgraded it to modern day specifications. We have sapphire crystal with AR coating and a sapphire bezel insert which is fully loomed with C1 superluminova, which is superior to the original Bakelite bezel insert as I've detailed. 300 meters is very strong specification. The bezel execution is outstanding. The screw down crown execution is outstanding. and really they deserve credit because this has no QC issues whatsoever. It's a 10 out of 10 well executed piece. So I'm going to declare it a champagne watch for lemonade money, and I'm going to highly recommend it to you for your consideration. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Yema Navygraf FSM for Sous-Marine. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you very much.